Now for some introductions. Jeff Selingo, who has been with FAN 2020, 2021, 2022, 2025. I don't know. We must like you. He has written about colleges and universities for more than 2.5 decades and is a New York Times bestselling author of 3 books, all of them for sale right there, and 1 for free. His book, Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions, takes readers inside the admissions offices of 3 selective universities, and it was named among the 100 notable books of the year by the New York Times. His new book, In Your Hot Little Hands, Dream School, is based on 2+ years of research and an original survey of 3,500 parents. It's fascinating. It's excellent. It was my beach read this summer. It was great. And it was also an instant New York Times bestseller. He's a regular contributor to the Atlantic, to the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, and he's also a special advisor to the president and professor of practice at Arizona State University, great school. He also writes a bi-weekly newsletter, which you really should sign up for. It's called Next. It is juicy. Comes out more frequently. Also late. You know, you're busy. And he also hosts a great podcast called Future You, the letter U. Joining him is a fan favorite, Dr. Matt Montgomery. He's the superintendent of Lake Forest District 67 and District 115. He's a proponent of lifelong learning, and he's also the lead superintendent for cohort and partner connections with the School Superintendents Association. He co-chairs its STEM Leadership Consortium, and he has imparted his knowledge as a past instructor at the graduate level at the American College of Education. He also interviewed for us last year David Yeager in September at Lake Forest High School, and he also interviewed Ellen Galinsky for us online, and he does such a great job, such great preparation. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate you being here. And now, with no further ado, let's welcome Jeff and Matt to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I hope that you walk away with information that you didn't have prior to being here. I have finished the book 2 weeks ago and was beaming with excitement as I thought about this time together with Jeff. And we had a little time before this, and he said the interviews go better when people have read the book. And I have checked that box, so we'll see what he says on my scorecard afterwards. So here we go, my friend. You've watched higher ed evolve for more than 2 decades. What first drew you into covering this world, and what keeps you curious today?
So first of all, thank you for coming out this evening. I know you have a million things to do, a million other places you could be, so I really appreciate you being here. Appreciate the Gorton Center, as well as Matt interviewing me, and especially to Lonnie and Fan for helping put all of this together. So I've been in and around higher ed for more than 25 years, but I actually got my start a little bit earlier than that. In the summer of 1994, I was a summer intern at U.S. News and World Report, working on the college rankings. And that summer internship really led me to understand that this is a business. We tend to think of colleges and universities as places probably many of us went. We continue to wear those sweatshirts 10, 20, 30, 50 years after we went, right? We go back for reunions and football games and basketball games, and we go back and we really love that place, right? And I understand that for many of us, including me, college was a transformative experience. It was a place where we might have met our lifelong friends, where we might have met our partners, where we might have discovered our passion in life. And let me tell you, colleges and universities know that. And during this search for your own kids, they're going to pull at those emotional heartstrings. And what ends up happening when they do that is that you sometimes make a bad match. You often overspend, I think, on this product that you're buying. And at the end of the day, it is a product. There is an emotional piece to it. I get it. But the thing that I learned that summer of 1994 was that this is a huge business. And because of that, we need to approach it more as this consumer product, which I hope to talk about tonight.
Thank you for that. I know that the U.S. News and World Report does one heck of a job of ranking high schools as well, and trying to figure out their statistics is not an easy task, but we have tried, so I can relate to the business aspect of it. Prior to us coming on stage, we realized that we both have teenagers in our house. Yes. We both have 16-year-old or almost 16-year-old and an almost 13-year-old. And it's interesting to look at this book from the dad's lens. So as this book flips the lens from how colleges pick students to how students pick colleges, what made you realize that there was a time for that shift?
Yeah, that was an important shift. So the last book, which as Lonnie mentioned is out in the lobby if you're interested in it, is a look inside the college admissions process. For a year, I spent time working with college admissions officers, sitting next to them as they chose a class at Emory, at Davidson, and at the University of Washington. So a big public, small private liberal arts college, and a big research university. And as I went out and talked about that book to audiences like this, often afterwards, parents and students and families would come up to me, and counselors would come up to me and said, Jeff, great book, really interesting on how colleges pick students, but the world of higher education is so vast and broad and deep. How are we supposed to make sense of it? Especially, by the way, if we can't get into one of those selective schools that I featured in the last book. What if we don't want to go to one of those places? What if we can't afford one of those places? How are we supposed to make sense of the rest of the world of higher ed? And it really struck me, Matt, because I've been covering higher ed for more than 25 years. After I left U.S. News and World Report, I went to do a couple of other things and then eventually came back to higher ed a few years later as a reporter and writer at the Chronicle of Higher Education, which covers colleges and universities essentially as their trade magazine. I spent 16 years there in a variety of roles. So I've been on college campuses all over the country, all over the world, interviewing presidents and faculty members and students. And so the world of higher ed makes a decent amount of sense to me, but I understand why we end up going to the rankings. Because if you look at all these colleges, all of which claim to be the right place for you, right? They'll give you the best deal. They'll give you the scholarships. Your kids will be loved and wanted there. They'll get a great education there. How are we supposed to make sense of that? And that's really what I wanted to do with this book. The highly selective places, they're great colleges and universities. And I'm not here tonight to tell you not to apply to those places, right? Not to think about those places. But if we look at the top 25 in the U.S. News and World Report rankings, for example, the average acceptance rate is around 10%, 10, 15% on how you cut it. So most of those places end up denying most of the students who apply. And so the goal of this book is to get you to widen that lens beyond just those schools. Again, apply to them, but have a wider lens. I want to give you permission to think with that wider lens, or at least have a backup plan if you don't get that acceptance. As you might expect at those places. And so the goal for this book is, okay, as you widen that lens, what are you looking for? What are the elements of a good college? And I'm not trying to give you a list of 100 things. I'm not even trying to give you a list of 50 things. Here are a couple of elements of what makes a good college. Here are the data points you should be looking for. Here are the questions you should be asking. And then my hope is that you use that to find that right fit, that right institution for you and your family.
I know when we talked earlier, I told you about my involvement with the College Board. I was with the head of admissions at Northwestern, and we were sitting in her office, and she was celebrating, a phenomenal leader, celebrating that Northwestern is at an acceptance rate of 6 or 7%, where the Ivies are hovering at 5 or under, according to her stats. So when you think about the top 25 averaging 10, know in my experience, when I'm talking to people, if you're going Ivies or Ivy adjacent, I think 10% is high compared to some of the things they're operating right now.
And let me just add something about that acceptance rate, because you're going to see the books that you got tonight. At the back of the book, I have a list of 75 new dream schools. Don't go there right now. We'll talk about it later.
Eyes up here.
Later. But one of the elements of that list is that they have to be accessible. They only made that list if they have an acceptance rate of at least 20, 25%. Most of them, by the way, have acceptance rates of 50, 60, 70, 80. And as I was telling, I live in a community very much like this outside of D.C. And as I was telling family friends about this book and talking about some of the schools on this list, they were saying, but Jeff, they accept 50 or 60% of students. And I said, so what? That is not an indication of quality. Head count, what you were just talking about, is a Acceptance rate is essentially a head count measure. How do colleges and universities get an acceptance rate of 5 or 6%? They just get way many more applicants, and that's exactly what has happened over the last 20 years. Among the 57 most selective colleges in universities in the U.S. over the last 20 years, the number of applications to those institutions has tripled, while the number of seats in their freshman class has essentially stayed the same. And indeed, applications overall, nationwide, have almost quadrupled since the year 2000. And the number of seats in most of the most selective colleges have stayed the same. So in some ways, when we say, well, Penn used to have an acceptance rate of 40 or 50%, and now they have an acceptance rate of 5%, their size of their freshman class hasn't changed. They just got many more applicants. And by the way, not more students, more students are applying, but they're applying to the same schools over and over again. That's how they became selective. They didn't become selective by suddenly becoming the most awesome institutions out there, and the most high quality institutions out there. And these are data points that I talk about in this book, that there are other measures of quality beyond selectivity. So one of the mindsets that I hope to shift in your mind tonight is that selectivity equals quality. Selectivity is simply a measure of, it's a numerical measure, and that's it.
Thank you, sir. Over the past few years, the landscape for college admissions has certainly changed with test optional policies and rising GPAs. We've changed what competitive even means.
Yeah.
So in a place like Lake Forest, where academic excellence is the norm, what does this leveling mean for how families should view college prestige?
So as we think about what has happened over the last 5 years, in particular in admissions, you mentioned test optional. So during the pandemic, about 600 colleges that are pretty highly selected places went test optional. And as a result, they got inundated with applications. So those numbers I was just giving you, 57 of the most selective colleges and universities have tripled their applicants since since the year 2000. A lot of that increase in applications has actually come just since the year 2000. I'm sorry, since the year 2020, right after the pandemic. And what that has meant is that students, as they add schools to their list, as they add colleges to their list, they keep adding many of the same institutions over and over again. So in fact, Matt, in chapter 1 of the book, we got data from Niche. Now, I know people love and hate Niche.
Not a big fan.
Okay, right. But the nice thing about them is they have this incredible database of students who use Niche to manage their college process. You might use SCORE, you might use Naviance, very similar data. And SCORE also provided a similar data in this way as well. And here what was interesting when we looked at their data in the aggregate. On average, when students start their college search, whether they open up a Niche account in their freshman or sophomore year of high school, or their SCORE account, whenever that might be, even in their sophomore year, and they start putting colleges on that list, it's a pretty wide range of colleges via the rankings or via selectivity. So in other words, they're actually buying into this idea that you should have lots of colleges on your list. But as they get into through their junior year and going into their senior year, the list starts to narrow. It starts to get smaller. Now, in many ways, that makes sense, right? You might start your college search with 50 or 60 colleges on your list, and you don't want to apply to 50 or 60 colleges, so you're going to get that list to be smaller. But one of the things we noticed is that as students move into that summer between their junior and senior year, the list gets smaller, but it also moves up the rankings, moves up to more selectivity. So students are narrowing their vision on colleges, but they're also making it, essentially, they're all choosing the same selective colleges over and over again. And that's particularly true, we were able to track this through the Niche data, at highly competitive high schools. So highly competitive high schools like this, like your school, students are essentially copying each other's lists of schools. So you're all applying to the same set of schools. And in some ways, this software, whether it's SCORE or Naviance, I don't know what.
We use Naviance.
You use Naviance, right? So one of the things Naviance does, if you're in this search or you've been in the search before, you have these scatter plots. So you know kind of what the previous year's classes and how they fared. Well, you keep seeing the schools that your students at your high school have applied to. You really never get served up new schools. So it just becomes this kind of reinforcing loop over and over again where students just keep applying to the same set of schools like there is nothing else out there. Well, I know from the year I spent inside college admissions that colleges don't have a quota necessarily of saying, well, we're not going to take more than 10 students from this school, but they're not going to take 50, right? They're not going to take 30. So there's really no advantage. Again, I'm not discouraging you from applying to these schools, but there's no advantage of you essentially copying everyone else's list. There's actually a huge advantage for you as an applicant to look wider, to look more broad, to look broader at a broader set of schools, because your actually chances of getting in are going to be better.
We're exceptionally fortunate in many ways because when you talk to the Northwesterns or the Harvards, they know who we are, and they know that our GPA at 4.2 or 3.9, it means differently than some of the other districts that we are competing with. So I think there is an awareness within the colleges of the communities in which students are coming from. I also know that they're not going to accept 50 kids from this senior class of
But what's
LMHS.
amazing, and I don't know what your numbers are like, but I did Stuyvesant High School in New York is in the book, and the director of college counseling there walked me through like the last 10 years of where they're applying, like the Northwesterns of the world, the Northeasterns of the world, wherever. And you can just see every year the number of students applying to these schools ticking up, ticking up, ticking up. And by the way, the number of students accept it essentially staying the same or sometimes even dropping. So again, what I'm hoping to do tonight is a little bit of a reality check, not to discourage it, but to encourage, not to discourage applying to those schools, but to encourage, hey, there's all these other institutions out there, which by the way, might be as good or better fit for you and your kids, and to just think about those places. Because can I tell a story about the student who opens up the book?
Absolutely. Thank you.
So William is in the introduction, and he grew up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, just outside of, in the shadow of the University of Minnesota, and he wanted to go to the most selective college he could get into. And him and his high school counselor worked on his list for early decision. So right around this time, so late October, they came up with 3 options: Northwestern, Columbia, and Stanford. And at the crack of midnight on October 31st, he pressed the button on his early decision application to Columbia, because they kind of gamed it out, which you'll see where this story goes in a minute. So, a couple weeks later, he gets his acceptance to Columbia. As he says, it's like winning the lottery. Now, early decision, we have a mixed audience here, so I don't want to assume everybody knows what early decision means, but you apply early, you find out early, it's a binding decision, meaning that's where you're going. So he got in early to Columbia, he shows up the following August, and suddenly the high of that win wears off pretty quickly. Can't get into a class he wants until maybe his junior or senior year. He did research as a high school student at the University of Minnesota, and he says to his advisor, "I'd like to work with this professor on his research," and the advisor said, "Yeah, that's never going to happen. That professor doesn't work with undergraduates." He wanted to try out a bunch of new clubs, and he described the competition to get into these clubs as intense as trying to get into Columbia. The core curriculum, which he never really looked at, moved at a speed of sound, as he described, and he never really got to enjoy it. People just constantly were working, and there was this attitude that if you weren't working as hard as everybody else, you shouldn't be there, right? And so he went home at the first break, the winter break, and he told his mom, "I think I want to transfer." His mom said, by the way, you have to come up with a story because nobody transfers from Columbia. And by the end of his freshman year at Columbia, he decided to transfer to the University of Minnesota, where he found his people, he found fun, he gets to do undergraduate research and so forth. And when I caught up with him, I said to him, I said, William, I said, all of these things that you discovered you didn't like about Columbia, you could have actually discovered during the college search. And he said, I know, but I was blinded by prestige. I was so focused on applying and getting in to the most selective college I could get into that I didn't think about what was the right fit for me. Now, he recognized that pretty early on, and he was able to transfer, and I congratulate him for that. But again, think about that fit. Think about what you want out of the process.
So as we move, and thank you for, you answered a question later about sharing a story about the student. So as families pivot from competition to clarity, you emphasize 3 pillars. You talk about career outcomes, hands-on learning, and belonging.
Yep.
So for families here tonight who are planning campus visits, how can they actually evaluate those 3 areas of career outcomes, hands-on learning, and belonging?
So one of the things about campus visits, I'm always amazed at, some of you are probably already planning your campus visits. I'm always amazed by these families who tell me, yeah, we're going to visit these 6 campuses in 3 days, and we're going to do a swing through, Boston or New York or whatever.
I'm laughing because we were driving past or through Vanderbilt or close to it, and I'm like driving in the car. I'm like, look up! And I'm like yelling at them, like, you have to see this. And we didn't go to one building, but I just lost my mind because I needed them to fall in love with something.
Well, and I think we have to slow it down a little bit to really discover, because what I think ends up happening is when you do try to, and I understand, visiting colleges is time-consuming, it's expensive, and so we try to group a bunch of them together. But what ends up happening is we go to the official visit, we get a presentation, we go on a campus tour, maybe we grab a bite to eat, and we leave. And we don't really get a sense of the place or a sense of the real place for us. And what do I mean by that? So some of the things you were just talking about, a sense of belonging. I want to spend time on a campus because I want to see how students are interacting, or if they are interacting with each other, with professors, in buildings, outside of buildings, right? I was walking around Northwestern's campus today because it was such a beautiful day here, and I was just watching students interacting with each other. Are they talking to each other, right? Or are they on their phone all the time? So these are things that you get to see the more time you spend on that campus, by the way, also during the school year. Second, I want to know around mentorship. Am I going to get to know my professors? So I want to, if I can, maybe sit in on a class, or at least visit with a professor if I can. Now, the bigger the campus is, the busier they are, the more difficult that becomes. But I at least want to be able to interact with some other undergraduates beyond the official tour guide to see what they think of their professors. Who are their favorite professors and why? And the more time you can spend on campuses, maybe there's students from your high school who now go there that you could be connected with. The college can help connect you with those places. And I want to see I want to be able to see that. And trying to rush through these campus visits, you get the official word from the campus. You may often never see the inside of an academic building. You may never even get to meet faculty members. And so the more you can slow this down to spend, if you can, an entire day on a campus or most of the day on a campus, especially if this is a place that you're highly considering. The other thing I'll tell you about campus tours, people go and visit their reach schools first. They're top of their favorites. They may never get to schools deeper on their list, schools that are considered their safety schools, until the very end, when maybe those are the only places they were accepted, and so now they're going to rush off and go see them. I will actually encourage you to flip the script a little bit. If you come up with a list, don't go to your reaches first. Go to schools that are your target schools or your safety schools first. First of all, you might be surprised. You might go to those places and end up loving them. But you also have something to compare those reach schools too. Places that are perhaps deeper in the rankings, places that are not everybody in your school goes to. You might not only again end up liking them with that first initial visit, but now you have something to compare these name brand, elite, top ranked schools to. And again, you might be very surprised by what you find.
So if you were advising a Lake Forest junior, my own is in the audience right now, what 3 questions should they ask on every college tour?
Okay, so first is tell me about the professors who teach first-year classes. The transition to college is probably the most important transition you're going to make. 25% of students don't make it to their sophomore year. 25% of students do not make it to their sophomore year. So you want to know who is going to be teaching me in those first semester. What are the classes going to be like? What are the requirements going to be like? Because you want to know, is that something that's going to pique my interest?
Can you clarify 25% leave college altogether or 25% transfer?
Oh, they either leave college altogether or they transfer.
Okay, I just want
Yeah,
to get that down.
yeah, thank you.
Lonnie,
so-
I'm asking the question.
No, it's a good clarification. Good clarification. Yeah.
Oh my God, like,
Yeah.
that's a lot of drop off.
So you're going to, many, and some of them end up dropping out from that number. So you want to know who's going to be teaching me that first semester. Second, you want to know what is the first year experience going to be like. I did a presentation earlier today where I talked a lot about the first year experience. A number of colleges and universities have built very intentional freshman and sophomore, and now even sophomore year experiences, where they build small cohorts within the freshman class. They actually name these things first year experiences. So as you're going to colleges, ask them, what is the first year experience like? That could be like at Denison, where everyone goes on an orientation trip, for example. Now, it might be just to Columbus, right, where they do hands-on learning. It might be a camping trip. It might be a river a river trip. There's different types of experiences, but everyone does a small group trip at Denison. It might be at like St. Olaf up in Minnesota, where orientation actually goes throughout the entire year. So it's not just a pre-freshman year experience, but they do orientation as you need it, essentially. It might be at Furman. Like at Furman in South Carolina, where everyone is assigned a small class essentially called College 101, where you are assigned to a small group cohort as soon as you arrive freshman year, so you get to know people, sometimes outside of your major, but you're assigned to a class that you stay with throughout that year. That class is also assigned a full-time professor who may or may not become your mentor, but is essentially welcoming to you, showing you that professors are there to help you out. Because many students are coming from high school where the primary job of the teachers are to teach. And then they get to college and they don't realize that at some of these places, professors are there for many different reasons, and a lot of it is not to do with teaching. It has to do with research and other sorts of service that they do. But at these places, and those are just 3 of the places I mentioned, all of which, by the way, are among these New Dream schools at the back of the book. They build these very intentional first-year experience programs that help make that transition to college, that help your kids find their people, right? Their sense of belonging, their peers. Help them connect them with adults, whether those are professors, advisors, coaches, that are going to help them discover what they really want out of college, that are going to advise them. And third, are very clear in helping them make that transition from high school to college so that they're not just spectators to the college experience, but they're actually engaged in campus. And the places I'm looking for are these places that have these first-year experiences. So those are the questions that I'm asking when I'm on campuses.
Thank you for that. It's interesting because those of you who know the work at LFHS, last year we piloted a scout experience for our freshmen, and this year have fully implemented it because we are struggling with the same problem of practice,
From eighth grade to
eighth grade to high school. And it has been widely reviewed as a successful thing. We're still working on it and haven't arrived yet, but I'm proud of that work, and it's interesting to hear the colleges doing the same thing.
I'm a huge fan of many of the colleges that are in the back of the book have these first-year experiences. They all look slightly different, the first-year experiences do, but it's a question I would ask. How are you going to transition my kid into that first year of college?
So I want to know if you would answer it, the first-year experience, with this question. You identified those 75 schools that delivered the great outcomes without the brand name spotlight. What unites them? Is it the first-year experience?
No, so a couple of things unite them. We did a very data-driven look at these institutions. So first thing that unites them is they're accessible. As I said earlier, the top 25 in the U.S. News and World Report rankings are great institutions, but with an average acceptance rate of like 10, 12%, they're highly inaccessible. So I want places that I can actually get into, right? So the first thing that unites them is they have an acceptance rate 25% and above. The second thing that unites them is we looked at student engagement. Every year, Indiana University does a big survey called the National Survey of Student Engagement. They survey hundreds of thousands of college freshmen, hundreds of thousands of college seniors. They've surveyed students at more than 1,600 colleges and universities over time. And one of the things we found out unfortunately, the thing I don't like about the survey is they do not release their results publicly about individual institutions. They will release them back to the institution. So some institutions release them to prospective students and parents, but we were able to send our list of schools on our list to them and say, hey, match these up and tell me if any of them score really low on this national survey of student engagement. The other thing that unites these schools is a good price to earnings ratio. What do I mean by that? How much are you going to pay for the school, and what are you going to get in return in terms of salary? So we often talk about the return on our investment. We often talk about earnings outcomes of colleges, but I was shocked. So a great example of one, Dickinson College in southern part of Pennsylvania, scored really high on this measure because they give out really good amount of merit aid to students, and their graduates punch above their weight in terms of earnings after college. So not only are you going to put in less money than you would at other private colleges, but your kids are going to get a bigger return on that investment. So that's another thing that we looked at. So those are among some of the elements that tie those schools together at the end of the book.
Thank you. So this brings us to something we talk about often in our schools, which is about balance, well-being, and defining success beyond a single acceptance letter. Just today, we have a champion of students, Dr. Aaron Lennart, who was talking about how we cannot let our report card scores that are given by the state or ACT scores define who these students are as individuals. So it has to be bigger than a single acceptance letter or a single ACT score. And you've said that an elite degree matters less than people think. Can you share a story? So you shared the story about the student at the beginning of the book. Is there another one that comes to mind who found the right fit outside of the rankings and thrived? Because I worry that some individuals in our community will say, yeah, Jeff, that's great for other kids, but those top 25 are the ones that I need for my own kid.
Yeah, so I have a couple. I want to tell you about Beth and Emily in the book. So Emily is a student who grew up in Pennsylvania. She applied to a dozen plus private colleges. She applied ED to the University of Chicago, and she was denied. And as she was putting together her list of schools, her mother said, you need at least one or two publics on there. And her mother ended up doing a lot of this research for her, and she came upon the University of Mississippi, of all places, and their honors college, the full scholarship that they would give to students, money that they would give for undergraduate research, and also study abroad support. So Emily applied, not because she wanted to, but her mother basically forced her to. She ends up getting in. She ends up getting into Vanderbilt. She also gets into Rice. And one day she gets a call from Oxford, Mississippi, and the dean of admissions is calling her personally. And they spend about a half hour on the phone, and she says, I've never been to Oxford, and she's like, you should come down, and they start talking about it, and she never received a call like that from Rice or Vanderbilt, because they don't have to do that, right? Colleges that love you, right, you might want to love back once in a while. So as I tell this story, I mean, you're going to be really shocked with what she ends up doing. So it comes down at the end to Rice and to Mississippi, to Ole Miss. And her father and her go to Rice the weekend before she has to make a decision. Now at Rice, she's probably going to end up paying about half of tuition, where at Mississippi, she's going to be a full ride for 4 years at their honors college. And she goes to Rice, walks around, does the tour and everything else, and walks across the street to a park, and her father do a pro-con list. And as she told me this story, she said the only pro I could come up with Rice was that people would know I'm smart because I went to Rice. It's like, really wasn't, there was so many things about it that I didn't like. But I wanted to tell other people I was going there. And I was embarrassed in some ways to say I was going to Ole Miss. Well, she ends up going to Ole Miss. And I know I'm telling you this story because Ole Miss is necessarily the right place for you, but she broadened her lens on something. She ends up going there. Full ride and so forth. And so this excerpt from the book ended up going in the New Yorker a couple of weeks ago. And the New Yorker, in their way of doing things, has to fact check everything, like literally everything, including re-fact check the entire book almost. So I had to reach out to her because she had to talk to the fact checker. And she's now on a Fulbright in Germany. She graduated. And she's just telling me how great her experience was. But more than that, the full ride gave her this ability to make choices after college that if she had debt or her parents spent the money that they would have spent for college, but now have this flexibility after college she wouldn't have had. And she just talked about this amazing flexibility. And I said, well, how about all the other students you're on the Fulbright with and things like that? And she said, yeah, they went, some went to Harvard, and some went to Princeton, and it comes up, and some people like give me this funny look when I tell them I went to Ole Miss, and then we just move on. And that's it. Like, we're all in the same program now. And so I think that we tend to think that, like, our undergraduate experience is going to define us. And the other student is Beth in chapter 2, who goes to a small liberal arts college outside of the top 100. It's so small that when you read that chapter, I never identify the school, because what I'm about to tell you next, you could easily find her. She goes there. She doesn't know what she wants to do. She thinks she wants to go into accounting. She ends up with professors who end up really caring about her. She does an undergraduate research project on the bench memos of Justice Blackmun. She really gets into the law, and a couple of professors really end up really caring about her. The president knows her by name, invites her to dinner when campus speakers come. She's like really a place that, again, they care about undergraduates. And she decides she wants to go to law school. And she applies to Harvard, among others. And she gets in. Ends up going to Harvard. And when she gets to Harvard, the same sorting mechanism happens, right? People think, well, you didn't go to a real undergraduate college, so we're not going to be in a study group with her, as she talks about it. But she ends up on Harvard Law Review, graduates, goes on to some great jobs. And as she describes this, she talks about that undergraduate experience where they really care about you, where they're going to watch you, where they're going to help you. And again, she goes on and does this great thing in graduate school, right? She goes on to Harvard Law School. And if you look at the 1L class at Harvard every year, the thing I like about Harvard is they put out the 1L class every year of where they went to undergraduates. It's a fascinating list. Because you're going to think, well, most of the people who go to Harvard Law School probably went to an Ivy. It's just the opposite. Most of the kids who go to Harvard Law School actually went to non-Ivies. There's people from Arizona State on there and University of Texas and some big publics as well as some Casanova College, right? Some small private colleges as well. And one of the things that I think as you're thinking about college is, remember, this is a long process. You probably will end up going to graduate school. Think about what you want out of the undergraduate experience. Rather than most of these great places are actually known for a lot of because of their graduate and professional experiences. So think about that for a moment.
I want to shift to parents a little bit and mindsets. And before we came out on stage, I talked to you about how I wrestle as an educational leader who graduated from a state university, who now works regularly with Harvard and is presenting with Stanford later this very week, and how I'm in these multiple paradigms of what I want as a leader of Lake Forest, what I want as a dad of 4 children. And I see and experience and have been guilty of that many parents, including myself, equate where their children go to school as how well they've done as parents. It's like a report card for us. And what stickers on the back of our cars. So the question is, how do families reframe that? Because I know in my heart it's not right.
It's hard,
but I wrestle with it
and
myself.
I'm not gonna deny that, right? So we did a survey of more than 3,000 parents for this book, and we asked them, how important is prestige in the college search to you individually? 16% said it was very important to them personally. We said, how important is it to your kids, prestige, as you apply to college? 28% said it was very important to their kids. Then we said, how important is it to people in your community? 62% said it was important to their people in their community. So even as you're sitting there tonight and you're saying, Jeff, what you're saying makes sense to me. But I don't want to get off this treadmill, or I don't want to tell my kid not to apply to these places, or I don't want to encourage them to think more broadly because everyone else is doing it. And I feel like I have to do it as well. And as I said, these are great places. We should consider them, but we also should consider these other institutions as well. And I want to talk a little bit about the outcomes for a minute, because chapter 2 of the book really looks at this idea of outcomes. And it was informed by a gathering like this in Washington, D.C. that I did in Northern Virginia about 4 years ago, where I was talking about thinking more broadly, and during the Q&A, a parent gets up and said to me, and we have this on tape, I'm more than happy to show it to you. She says, I think what you're saying is irresponsible. And I said, what do you mean? And she's like, I work for McKinsey. And she said, we will not hire people from, we only hire people from a set of institutions. And they're not outside the top, 25. And I said, okay. Interesting. And we had a debate about it, and I went home and I wrote that down, and it really formed the basis of chapter 2. And here's what we looked at in chapter 2. One is we looked at this data that the Opportunity Insights group out of Harvard has done. So Raj Chetty, you probably have seen a lot of economic studies that he's come out with, looking at where people went to college and what they do afterwards in terms of earnings. They have access to an amazing amount of data from Ivy Plus institutions as well as IRS data. And I went up and met with David Deming, who works on that team. The reason I picked David is because he went to Ohio State. Everybody else on that team, by the way, went to an Ivy institution, but David went to Ohio State, and he now, by the way, is a dean at Harvard. So I wanted to hear his own personal story, but I also wanted to dig deeper on something in the data when they presented this a couple of years ago. If you go to an Ivy Plus school, you are going to have a 61% better chance of ending up in a 1%. So there's no doubt about it. I am not here to say that going to an Ivy Plus school is going to lead to a career that's not great and you're not going to make a lot of money. You are, no doubt about it. But remember, small acceptance rates at those places. So 61% better chance, and often that's because of the alumni network. That you're essentially buying an alumni network. But what was deeper in that paper was this: 61% better chance of ending up in the 1%. But on average, the average outcomes at the Ivy Plus schools, they found, are similar to the average outcomes at UCLA, University of Florida, University of Texas, a number of other public and private institutions. In other words, we tend to over-index on the outliers at the Ivy Plus institutions, at the top of the class at the Ivy Plus institutions, where on average you're going to do, you potentially do just as well. So a lot of it is how you go to these colleges, not where you go necessarily. But one other data point from that chapter is I wanted to go back to that mother who said I was irresponsible of me to recommend this. So I went to a firm called Lightcast. They trace where they trace resumes of where students go to college and where they end up working. And I said to Lightcast, I said, I'm kind of curious. If I gave you a list of 1,200 colleges by selectivity, can you match them where they ended up going to work in the Fortune 500? Sure, we could do that. Let's just look at the Fortune 50, right? Let's just look at the biggest companies. So that's what they did. They looked at selectivity. So I sent them a list of 1,200 colleges sorted by selectivity. So 0 to 20%, most selective, 20 to 40%, 40 to 60%. And they matched them up. And in the book, in chapter 2, when you look at it, there is a chart. And we picked 3 companies within that Fortune 50. General Motors, Microsoft, and Morgan Stanley. And what we found is that at every selectivity band, there are people working at these companies. And in fact, in the lower selectivity bands, there's actually in some cases more graduates working. Do you want to know why? Because they're much bigger. Most of the small selective colleges are tiny by comparison. And so they are working at these places. So this idea that you can never get a job at some of these places is false. It's false. And that's one of the myths that I wanted to break in this book and in this chapter.
So let's move to forward-facing, because you write about how the next decade will force colleges and all of us to adapt. So if we look 5 to 10 years ahead of where we are now, what trends do you see shaping how students choose and colleges compete?
So the first thing that's going to happen, and we're in the midst of it right now, just starting, is a demographic cliff. So class of 2025, last year's high school graduating class is the largest high school graduating class in the U.S. for as far as the eye can see, through the 2030s. So starting this year, 2026, it'll start falling. 27, 28, 29 really starts to fall and falls basically throughout the next decade, particularly true, by the way, in the Midwest and the Northeast. Most students go to college within 75 miles of home. So most colleges are going to increase the competition. They basically compete for students in a greater way than they are now. Now, that's not true among the most selective colleges. The most selective colleges have applicant pools. Remember, we were talking earlier, right? 3-4 times as many applicants as they had just 10, 20 years ago. If they drop off a few applicants here and there, maybe their acceptance rate goes from 7%. What did you say at Northwestern?
It was 6%.
6%. Maybe it goes from 6% to 9%. Maybe it goes to 12%. It's not going to go suddenly to 30 or 40%. But at all these other institutions, particularly a lot of the ones in the book, they will be slightly easier to get into, in some cases much easier to get into. But many of these institutions are also going to be competing on price as well. And your chances of getting better merit aid discounts deeper in the rankings are going to get greater. That's number one. Number two, the big change that I see happening on many of the campuses I visit is this tension between experiential learning and academic learning, hands-on learning, real skills that are needed in the workplace. I was just at a big conference last week in Silicon Valley, Adobe, Salesforce, Workday, all these big tech companies. You might hear, well, they don't want college degrees. They actually do want college degrees, by the way, but they don't care as much about where those degrees come from. They just want students who can actually do the work, do the job. They want students who can write. They want students who can problem solve. They want those soft skills, but they also want hard skills of students who have real skills in using some of this work. So if you have a student who graduates with a degree in history, but also knows the Adobe suite or knows how to do data visualization, we know from data that their chances of getting a job are going to be greatly increased. And they're going to make more money. If you're a marketing major and know data analytics, you're going to be much better off. So a lot of what you do in college matters, in some cases, more than where you go, and in some cases might even matter more than what you major in. And we know this, again, from data that we looked at for this book, that selectivity and major only get you so far, but that hands-on experience matters just as much, which is, again, why when we were talking about what are you looking for when you look for a college, what are those places that are going to help you get that hands-on experience?
Well, as of late, and this community is no stranger to this, we have invested heavily into our Portrait of a Learner that covers 6 competencies that sound like they're soft skills, but they're durable skills. And when you look at the economic reform report, the power of those durable skills are as important as the academic skills. Yep. And we can't underscore how much we need to work on integrating experiential learning, because that will increase the durable skills. And those two married together with a strong academic excellence will enhance their probability to be successful in college and career. And I think that it's a shift of where we are. So I want to talk, and we're getting close, I want to talk about AI though. Okay. So I want to know from your vantage point, how will AI, hybrid work, workforce changes, perhaps change or redefine the value of a college degree? You just said that they still want the college degree.
They still want the college degree, and it's unclear. I mean, I think colleges right now are a little flat-footed in terms of how they're reacting to the market around AI. I think that colleges that prepare, one of the things happening, again, I was just at this conference last week, and I was surprised at the number of companies that are disinvesting in internship programs, in early career programs. You probably read the stories, there's one like once a week, on early career jobs kind of disappearing, those first steps on the ladder. And so you might be saying, well, what am I sending my kid to college for? Or if I'm sending them, how much am I paying for what I might get in return? So I'm not quite sure what, the job market is changing drastically. I was with a college admissions officer today who is at a place where they were talking about their computer science majors dropping quite rapidly over the last couple of years, because again, students are, 5 years ago we said get a degree in computer science, and now there are fewer jobs in that area. So I think the key here is those durable skills, right? So if I'm picking a school today, or I'm picking a major, I want a place that is going to both broadly educate me in those durable skills: writing, teamwork, problem solving, critical thinking, and also help me get specific hands-on job skills that will help me get that first job. So kind of both and so I want to go to a place that has both kind of a broad liberal arts education, as well as could give me a very specific education in a major that I want, even if it's computer science, by the way. So the admissions dean I was talking to today is at Harvey Mudd, and she said, one of our advantages, we think, is that we not only teach the technical side of computer science, but we also teach the broad humanities and thinking side of computer science, and that's going to be more critical not only in computer science, but in pre-med and health sciences and business throughout the curriculum.
I think the both and component is something that we've been honing in on in our work, that you can have academic excellence and the durable skills, and how do we create learning environments to support both.
And Matt, what's interesting about that is that is almost exactly the opposite of what has happened over the last 10 years. I mean, if you look at what the majors that students have chosen over the last 10 years, we've had a flight away from the humanities. You're probably seeing a story every week about colleges closing majors and departments, and most of those are in the humanities, because the huge increase has been in STEM and business. And most students feel like, well, that's a guaranteed job. And maybe it has been for the last 10 years, and I'm not saying it won't be, but be sure that you're blending that with more of these durable skills or other disciplines, right? This idea of cross-disciplinary, whether it's another major, whether it's a minor, whether it's specific skills that you're going to get in addition to that major. And so it's very different than the sub-specialization that has been very popular over the last 10 years. I'm not saying, again, that very specific majors are going away, but partnering that with or complementing that with a broader set of skills and disciplines, I think is going to become more important in the next 10 years than less important.
I think one of the biggest things we can instill upon our young people is adaptability and the ability to be nimble and agile, because the likelihood of them staying in one career for 30 years is not what it once was, and they will likely have multiple careers throughout their adult life. We are getting close, and Lonnie does a wonderful time management, maybe one of the best I've ever seen, but I have one more question. So I'm going to ask the question, then it's on you to hit it in the next minute.
Okay.
So if you could leave this audience with 3 mindsets to carry through the college process, what would they be?
3.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
it's your time. You have
The-
1 minute and 10 seconds.
Okay, 1 minute and 10 seconds. Okay, I'm going to actually just leave them with 1, if that's okay. Because this is the most important thing, besides being a consumer, that you're going to hear tonight. You're going to often through the college process ask yourself, whether it's you as a family, your kid, what else can we do to get into fill in the blank college? I hear this from students all the time. As Matt said, I have 2 teenagers at home. And as my 16-year-old is choosing courses or trying to decide, should I join this club or that club, or she's a year-round swimmer and she has to make sacrifices to do that, and she's like, well, maybe I should not do this instead of do that. And she always says, Dad, what should I do? And I said, for what? She said, for college. And I said, why does that matter? Like, what do you want to do? And parents often ask me this, like, what else can we do? What other AP courses can we take? What other activities can we do? What other club should we start? You know, how else should we save the world to get into fill in the blank college? And I always reply by saying, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do to challenge yourself? What interests you? Because if you're doing it because you want to burnish that resume that's going to help you get into that college, here's what might happen. You're going to apply to, fill in that blank college. So say you're going to apply like William did, early decision to Columbia. They're going to get that application, and on a random Wednesday in December, they're going to read that application probably in 8 to 10 minutes. If you read who gets in and why, you'll see how quick the process goes. And they might love you. You might be a great candidate, but they have as many seats as in this auditorium in their freshman class, and they may have 10 kids who qualify for that one seat, and they only can take 1. And probably they're going to end up denying you. And that decision is going to come back to your house. You're going to open up that portal, and it's going to be a denial, and it's going to be incredibly upsetting. I know it. I see it in students all the time. And then there's going to be one of 2 reactions. Some students will say, okay, I'll move on somewhere else. And other students will say, but what did I do all of that for? Why did I take those extra classes? Why did I do that swimming? Why did I join that club? What did I do it for? And if that is the reaction, if they did it just to get into that college, they did it for the wrong reasons. And that's what I want to leave you tonight. As you're thinking about what you're doing in these 4 years of high school, this is a moment in time that is a wonderful time in life. And unfortunately, what I think has happened is that we have made high school about college. We have made every moment, especially of that junior and senior year, especially of that junior year, and now I feel like it's starting to filter back into the sophomore and even the freshman year. And even, by the way, I also have an 8th grader at home, and we had a coffee with the upper school folks at my leaders at my daughter's school, and half the questions from the 8th grade parents were about college. My daughter's yelling at me with her eyes right now, so you could... In 8th grade. I'm getting lectured with her eyes as you keep talking. And so it is up to each of us. By the way, colleges are not going to change this. High schools are not going to change this because high schools react to what colleges are doing. The rankings won't change. The College Board won't change. The Common App won't change. None of those activities are going to change. It is up to each of us to say these 4 years are critically important to our kids' development. By the way, teenagers change drastically over the 4 years of high school. I will even argue they'll change even over the course of 8 months of 1 year. Let that be, let that happen, and let's stop making high school about the path to college and only the path to college. So I will stop my lecture there tonight. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.